former senior ABC News correspondent, longtime White House correspondent as well, Jim Avila, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Kim.
Good morning, sir. It was a long... is that a hand in front of your lens, or is that a...
messed up here? How about that?
Yeah, it's better. We don't... Yeah, whatever. However it works for you. That's better than the hand, yes.
I don't have my normal information here.
Yeah, that's okay. I wonder if you can speak to what we've seen so far. How did you evaluate the three major networks and then beyond the three majors?
Well, let me say first, Mark, that I'm angry and sad right now about what's going on over there. I'm sure we all are. And it's really, really hard to talk about even. Right now, in fact, and I think Kim will find it on her news, that they're reporting that a hospital now has been hit in Gaza with more than 200 people who were in the hospital. And the Hamas is saying that it was an Israeli bomb from an airplane. And Israel is saying they don't know yet what it was. But more just the death and carnage continues, and it's just very sad. In fact, it's very hard to watch, the continuing coverage, because it's just one sad thing after another. What I wrote about was the initial, especially the initial few days of the coverage by the networks, ABC, CBS, NBC, and also CNN. What I found is that, of course, the networks are far behind, especially at the beginning of something like this happening. And they're far behind because they no longer staff places like Jerusalem. We used to have a full bureau. When I worked at NBC and ABC, we had full bureaus there, including a correspondent and bureau chief and some producers. So when something like this happened, we would be ready to cover it right away. And even when people would go on vacation, I remember when I was at NBC, if the main guy went on vacation in Jerusalem, I went in to cover for him. They would not leave it uncovered. But the economics of major networks nowadays means that everything is covered out of London. All the correspondents are now in London. All the producers are in London. They may have a stringer or two around the world, but there's nobody in the Far East for most of these networks. CBS does have somebody in Tokyo. There's nobody in Jerusalem or Cairo or any of these places, or Jordan, where there used to be correspondents. So when this happened on a Saturday afternoon our time, there was nobody there to cover it. And not only that, because it's the weekend crews have strong people who work in New York and Washington, but everybody else is off. And there's only a few people working in New York and Washington. And so they have to put out an all call. But the problem is that an all call nowadays doesn't go to that many people. There just aren't that many people working. So it was a real sputter at the beginning for the networks on Saturday and Sunday as they scrambled to get their people in place. And they didn't get their people in place until Monday, when we saw the likes of David Muir, Lester Holt, Nora O'Donnell all anchoring from Tel Aviv. And they had some correspondents who flew in from London on the ground and began to gather information. And then they began to catch up. And there was some good work done. But they're just at such a disadvantage by their economic cuts.
Well, you make another point in your piece, as I recall, which is along the lines of, when you aren't in the area, your contacts, your connections that you cultivate over the months, they don't exist because it's tough to have them from places like London. And so you land maybe in time to do decent coverage, but a lot of the different ways in which you'd get information have dried up.
Yes, the correspondents are forced to parachute in, we call it. So they come in after it's happened. And if you noticed is when watching the network newscast, there was a lot of walking around and pointing at the damage that had happened. And this is what happened over here. This is at the kibbutz, how terrible it was. But there's no sources. These people don't have, these correspondents, because they're in London, they're not in Jerusalem full time. It's difficult for them to get information. They don't have the contacts, as you say. They don't have the experience of living there. Um, you know, in I always hate to say this because in the old days, because I'm old and you sound like an old man about how it used to be great. But I have to say that the correspondents in the old days who lived in that area, there was a guy named Martin Fletcher who used to work for NBC, who lived in Tel Aviv, and he knew what it was like to live under siege. We had a correspondent in Jordan who was because he was credentialed in Jordan, could get into Gaza, could get into the West Bank. We don't have that anymore. There are no correspondents.
Do you find yourself
in Gaza.
then? I mean, you in your piece you mentioned CNN, and I'm wondering if you find yourself checking out Al Jazeera and some of the other networks that have connections, although I would maybe you feel that they're biased, connections in the region. Where do you find alternative media? Do you look on YouTube? Where do you find it?
Well, the BBC is a strong candidate. The BBC has correspondents in most places around the world. So when breaking news happens around the world, I did tune into BBC, and they did a good job, and they had a correspondent in Israel on the day of. Al Jazeera, I find to be straight most of the time. I mean, you have to take it for what it is that it's a news organization based in Qatar. Now, Qatar, of course, is an Arab nation that is aligned with the United States, and the United States, we have a huge military base there, but they're also in Qatar is the headquarters of Hamas. So, you have to take that with a grain of salt. Watch it. They do have correspondents in the Arab countries, which will give you that side of the story. But recognize that it is a side of the story that you may not hear on the other networks, is valuable, but has to be viewed with a bit of, I don't want to say skepticism, just a bit of more understanding of where they're coming from.
Just because I have you, and I'll let you go here in a minute, the old Colin Powell line, you break it, you buy it type thing when you go into the Middle East. Israel had Gaza. They were in Gaza. Israeli orchards and factories and schools. And then in 2005, they left Gaza to surrender the area, in effect. And it wasn't a comfortable thing. Many settlers didn't want to leave, to the Palestinians, to those who, again, would not have to coexist with Israelis. Since then, it's become this festering cesspool of Hamas-dominated society. And now this horror was perpetrated against Israelis. And Israel's going back in with the military. And they may be in a situation where they have to rebuild Gaza. Again, you sort of have to begin to own Gaza again. It feels as though that is a situation that's fraught with just absolute awfulness.
Yeah, the whole situation, it's difficult to see what the exit strategy is. Again, the United States and Israel, now its huge ally, has to figure out, not only do we go in and destroy Hamas, but what do we do afterwards? The same situation we had in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Hopefully they learn a bit from what the United States has gone through. There's no doubt that Israel can crush Gaza, and it's doing so. And the debate is whether it should, and whether or not it should do it more surgically, or whether it should strike at the genesis of all this, which is Iran. If you don't take out Iran, is it going to grow? Is it just going to grow again? Is Hezbollah going to come in? It's a very complicated situation. I've found myself feeling that perhaps it's time that Israel, with the United States backing, takes out Iranian nuclear plants, and if they know where their leadership is, take them out as well. Iran is the evil backer of both of these terrorist organizations, Hezbollah and Hamas, and they'll continue to grow unless Iran is dealt with. And not dealing with Iran is not a smart move in my estimation. One more thing, Mark, and I know you got to go. And Kim and I were talking about this last night. As far as the media is concerned, one of the things you have to be careful of, there's a huge amount of disinformation going on right now on the internet. You have to, I've told you before, Mark, get off the websites. The websites out there are so full of misinformation now. The initial story that babies had their heads cut off, untrue, not true. And the initial information, about some of these things have to be vetted. You have to wait and go with news organizations that have earned your trust over time. And I'm talking about the networks, and I'm talking about CNN. In my column, I do talk about MSNBC being really out of its league right now because they don't, for some reason, they are not using, or they did not use the huge resources they have at NBC, the parent company, and they didn't have their correspondents ready to go, and they aren't using them that often. Instead, they're going back to their political model, which is to interview a lot of experts. Well, that's not what we really want right now. We really want to know what's going on the ground firsthand. And in my column, I say I didn't even review what Fox is doing because Fox is no longer a news organization, and I find it an insult to actually review them. So be careful of the sources of information you're getting, because you're going to get biased information that in the United States skews heavily to the Israelis. And we're not getting any information out of Gaza that is trustworthy, and it really makes it difficult to understand what's going on there.
What's interesting too is, hi Jim, is that
Hi, Kim.
I was, looking at mainstream media sources that I trust, and was accused by someone that is of Palestinian descent of only looking at mainstream media sources, which he said were all very favor the Israeli side of this conflict. It's just so interesting because it feels like no matter what you report, somebody's always going to be upset about it. So all you can really do is focus on the facts of what's happening.
Yeah. So I would say this. CNN does have a Gaza reporter that appears once in a while, mostly through information and video. So they are getting some information of Gaza. Al Jazeera, if you want to make sure you're getting the other side, I would watch Al Jazeera. There's not much disinformation on there. They're pretty good. They vet very well. You can trust them most of the time. But these websites that are out there, what he's talking about, or she's talking about, unfortunately, are these videos that are posted that are AI and come from Hamas. Hamas is releasing a lot of videos, and you really can't trust them to whether or not they are, false narratives, fake. What do they call those things? Fake something or other. Fake videos.
Fake
Sure.
news.
Deep fakes.
Deep
fakes. You got to stay away from those.
Well, it makes it really hard to know what you're looking at. And already Elon Musk and X have been taken to task for disseminating all this stuff. And it's really hard to know when you're on social media, are you looking at news or are you looking at war propaganda?
Well, look at the correct sites. Don't look at the videos on their own that come from Hamas, come from people on the ground who are not journalists. Look, I know everybody calls themselves a citizen journalist because they have an iPhone. I'm sorry, that does not hold water. You are not a citizen journalist. You are not a journalist. Journalists are trained to vet things, to understand the source, and even they get fooled on occasion. but it's rare. And when they do, they
Yeah.
come back and they say that was wrong. Here's a correction. So that's my advice, is to stay off of those. Don't worry about, look,
Yeah.
both sides here, the Palestinians and the Israelis, are complaining about news coverage. That's the way it's going to be. The Israelis were attacked with a massacre. They have every reason to fight back, and they have every reason to be sensitive about the news coming out of Gaza and what they're doing in retaliation. But those in Gaza, not everybody in Gaza is a terrorist. There are, millions of people there who are good people, good Muslims who didn't vote for or support Hamas. And we can't forget them. And we can't let Israel overreact and destroy hospitals, which they may have done in this case. We have to wait and see whether or not it really was them. But, and send rockets into the fleeing people who are going to the border where they told them to go. That those things are not acceptable. And I think Biden has been suggesting that in a careful way.
Yeah.
So, we want to all jump in on the Israeli side because, look, it was the worst massacre since the Holocaust. So we do, as Americans, and they are our ally, feel for them and want to be with them. But we can't ignore the atrocities on the other side.
Quickly, a super chat. Thank you so much, Jim, for telling us. I've been doing the same thing, listening to mostly French 24, I-24, and Al Jazeera. The other thing on social media is a mess. Yeah, it's thanks for that, KN, Kareen. I think it's tricky, and there are no good moves here for anybody. The latest from, of course, the U.S. is the President of the United States is going over there. So you can't really find much greater, higher profile support. And I'm sure they've done the arithmetic on that. I think that he's trying to, and he will announce a humanitarian area and maybe a humanitarian passage in southern Gaza. We'll have to see what happens. But Jim, thank you. We'll talk to you on Friday, and we link to your article on our YouTube channel. Thanks so much, my friend.
I put it
Thanks
in the
for
chat
having me
as
on
well.
this very
Okay. Jim Avila, everybody.
Thanks,
weird
Jen.
day.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.